Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Ganga Jamuni. It's the 2nd of October 2020, a very special day. Happy Gandhi Jayanti to everybody. And as we remember Gandhiji, let's take a moment to recollect the contribution of the great Mahatma, as well as thousands upon thousands of others who won us a hard-won freedom. My name is Rohit Mishra, and I'm a supporter and advocate for Ganga Jamuni. I sit here today because uh, I really value what Ganga Jamuni does. Those among you who've been listening in for the better part of our live sessions over the past few months would know that Ganga Jamuni is a educational and learning initiative that promotes cross-cultural understanding, especially among the youth. We've been documenting people's histories, a very humanistic or a human touch rather than institutional or state related. And through this tradition of oral histories, we hope to build in due course a rich archive speaking about the contribution of individuals to the greater collective good. And when I say the collective good, that includes the nation state of India, of course, but also our contribution to our societies, our communities, and constitutional frameworks such as secularism and plurality, some of which people might consider to be under threat. But be that as it may, we hope to today cover an element of constitutional statecraft or structure which involves the armed forces. Um, and to help us do that today, we have um, Commodore Anil Jay Singh. Uh, Commodore Singh was commissioned into the Indian Navy in 1981. So very many years ago, and he'll speak to us about the events, the stellar events, the notable events of the 1971 war. And as many of you would know, the 71 war almost marked the coming to age for the Indian Navy. And we'll, without giving too much away, I expect Commodore Singh will touch deeply into aspects of that famous victory. Now, uh, in line with what Ganga Jamuni hopes to achieve, I have requested the Commodore to speak about the human aspects and not just technical or warcraft, but the human aspects of what led to that naval success, what led to eventually the strategic success of the 1971 war. Uh, so elements of what role the Navy plays in nation building and as a constituent arm, as a sword arm of the Indian state, and elements of leadership, of man management, of the ethos of what constitutes a fighting force. Uh, by way of introduction, let me also say that Commodore retired in 2011 after a full 3 decades of service. And during those 3 decades, I'm given to understand that he's commanded 4 submarines, and uh, uh, so he's a submariner in the real sense of the word. And we hope to hear about the experiences uh, of that specialized fighting force. In 1971, as many of you might recollect, submarines especially on the Pakistani side, had a pretty dominant role in the events during the course of that war. So perhaps he'd touch on that. Um, what else can I tell you about Commodore Singh? He eventually served in the Directorate of Naval Plans and the Submarine Acquisition at Naval Headquarters. Um, he was instrumental involved in drafting the Navy's 30-year submarine construction plan. and the 15-year shipbuilding plan. So essentially, stuff that is forward-looking and helps create a navy for the future. So let's welcome um, Commodore A J Singh this evening and uh, start by wishing him uh, a very good evening and happy Gandhi Jayanti, sir.
Thank you, Rohit, and again, thank you for this opportunity. I'm delighted to be amongst you and consider it a privilege. And I think,
Uh, Commodore Singh, we are barely able to hear you, so if you would just perhaps speak up a little.
is that better now?
That's better. That's better.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Rohit, and Ganga Jamuni for giving me this opportunity, for inviting me for your show on a subject that's very, as you would understand, is very dear to my heart. And I think it's a saga that needs to be told. Not very many people know what a navy does. It operates far away from land. People see tanks on the road. People see fighter aircraft in the air, but they have no idea. Even now, I'm asked questions. What do you do at sea?
Yeah. Sorry, we lost you for a minute. We still don't have you back.
Am I back now? I
You're
have
back
you here.
now. You're
Yeah.
back now. So what do you do at sea?
Well, you must have heard the famous adage: "The more you sweat in peace, the less you bleed in war." So we are
Exactly.
always preparing for that eventuality when we'll be called upon to deliver. And in war there are no runners up. So you either deliver or you're delivered. So it's one of two things that happens.
For
So there's no
deliverance.
chances you can take. So there are no chances you can take, and so you got to keep preparing. And a ship is a composite unit. So, and like there's a very famous poem called "The Laws of the Navy," and it says, on the weakest link dependeth the might of the chain. So you have to make sure there is no weak link in that crew of 100, 150, 200, whatever number of people you have. Because each guy has a job to do, and one
Hmm.
weak link can take a ship down. So it's
Yes,
about
indeed.
making sure that everyone delivers to his potential and his training and his knowledge. And you've got to just keep perfecting that. So that's
So it's
primarily what
about
we do.
training in
Yes,
peacetime to secure a victory in war, of course.
yes, that's correct. And of course, now the Indian Navy is operating extensively with foreign navies. A lot of interoperability that's happening. You learn from them; they learn from you. We go on board their ships; they come on board ours. So we are getting the best practices of all the navies. We're sort of assimilating them and putting them into practice. And technology, with the advancements that are happening in technology, also that is another factor that has to be always kept in mind. Otherwise, if one doesn't keep pace with technology, one is going to be left behind.
Right.
So
Right.
it's a,
Now, there may be some in our audience who might wonder about the dichotomy of talking about a fighting arm on Gandhi Jayanti. But I think you said it best when you said you, you sweat in peace, and so that you don't bleed in war. So there is this element, of course, of a hard-won freedom. One in our case by, I think, very highly moralistic means. But there is also a price to eternal freedom, which is watchfulness and preparation for conflict, if indeed it does come.
Yes, of course. History has always shown that India has never ever been an aggressor to date.
Hmm.
But we will definitely not allow anyone to be aggressive against us. We'll defend our own territory, our territorial integrity, what we stand for, our motherland. So I think we all have to prepare for that. And while you mentioned Gandhi Jayanti, well, Gandhiji never said, he said non-violence, but he never said that you don't protect your own motherland. And
Exactly.
today also happens to be the birth anniversary of Lal Bahadur Shastri, another great Gandhian. But he led us to
Yes.
victory in the 65 war. And in fact, it was that victory which sort of redeemed our self-esteem and our prestige after the debacle of 1962. So he had an
Right.
equally important role to play in the India of today, the confident India of today.
Some would indeed say that what happened in the lesser known events of 67 at
Also,
Nakula, I think, um,
yes,
against a dominant Chinese garrison also was as a consequence of what played out in the 65 war, perhaps.
Oh, yes, absolutely. I think it was all about getting the self-confidence back of knowing that we're a confident army, we can hold our own, given the proper equipment, given the proper training. I mean, the Indian soldier is second to none in valor and bravery. He
Indeed.
needs to get the right instruments to deliver the right effect. And that
I'm
is,
glad you said that because of course uh, as lay citizens we hold the Jawan up with deep respect. We hold the uniform with respect, with great gratitude. These are young men and increasingly young women who serve at the edges of our vast country, and we are, of course, not just a large landmass, but we have an enormous seaboard. Uh, so there is that element of sailors and at the edges of the continental shelf for us, who are doing an incredibly difficult job under trying circumstances frequently. Uh, so we extend our best wishes, especially to people who serve on the borders at this difficult time, and we'll touch upon that later. Difficult time in the increasingly cold areas of Ladakh.
that's true. The army has a tough job to do, undoubtedly.
Right, right. So our audience is not a deeply technical audience. Of course, there would be some among them who deeply follow military matters closely, but the vast majority of people who tune into Ganga Jamuni, I think, are interested uh, in the human aspect uh, of events. Sure, the technical stuff and for example, the nature of the ships and so on are interesting, but the storytelling we try to bring forward to capture the oral history, and we spoke about this when we were preparing for this session. We are a nation of oral history, really. We don't perhaps document things as well as certain other societies, but we have a great oral history tradition. And and what creeps through, or what the common strand in that oral history tradition is the importance of the individual person with all his strengths and weaknesses, all the foibles, and perhaps in a war setting that's even more clear because the biggest decisions sometimes hinge on the tiniest of details. Do they not?
Absolutely, you're absolutely right. Finally, it's the man behind the gun that matters. It's only
Hmm.
the gun will only be as good as the man using it. And similarly on ships, similarly aircraft, similarly in any field of warfare, and of course leadership, very very important. Uh, Leaders have been spectacularly successful. Some have been spectacular failures. The ones who failed were not necessarily bad leaders. It's just that circumstances weren't right. They took the wrong decision at the wrong time and paid the price for it. So that, of course, is a very, very important aspect of leadership.
So speak to us, if you would, sir, about the leadership. We spoke about Shastriji, a diminutive person in physical size, but a giant of a man. Uh, how much do the armed forces, uh, in general and Navy in particular, rely on the political leadership of the nation um,
Look, in
in times of peace and in times of war?
Look, in any democracy, and I think India is a very stable democracy. The armed forces are and should be absolutely apolitical. They are serving the country. They are serving the Constitution of India, and not a political leader or a political party or a political ideology. I think that
Indeed.
has to be underlined. And the Indian
Yes.
armed forces have inherited this from the British, and I think it's remarkable how, in a neighborhood where militaries have tended to be dominant, we have still retained that absolutely apolitical ethos. In our messes, when we are young officers, we are told that three things are never discussed in a mess: politics, women, and money. These are three taboo subjects.
Hmm.
so we've all been brought up in that ethos. But yes, because it is very important that the armed forces function under the control of the political leadership. That political leadership must be very aware of the ethos of the armed forces, the role of the armed forces, and the security considerations that drive the armed forces. And therefore, it
Right.
is very important that the needs of the armed forces are met. When I say needs, I don't mean material needs. I mean, in terms of providing them the right equipment, the right training, the right environment to be able to deliver the goods. That is very important. There is something called an unwritten covenant between the soldier and the state. The soldier does what he does, and the state is supposed to do for the soldier what the state is supposed to do. And particularly in a democracy, this sometimes becomes a little tenuous because very often the state is not really able to understand why it is supposed to do what it is supposed to do. And this really came home to me, not so much in India, because here we never really gave it much thought. But when I was posted as a defense advisor in London, Indian Defense Naval and Defense Advisor in London, there the covenant was taken very seriously. There were articles, if there was any sort of, at any stage, if it was felt that the political leadership wasn't doing what it was supposed to do to support the soldier, it would be in the newspapers that, the government is not upholding the covenant. The chiefs would talk about it. So that's something that probably needs to be reminded frequently to the political leadership, that you too have a responsibility to the soldier. It's not just the soldier who has a responsibility to the state. He has it. He will deliver what he has to do. But he doesn't expect material gains, but he expects whatever he expects. It's a sort of interaction between the two, which is very important. It's unwritten, but it's there.
Lovely. I think that sets the stage for this evening's discussion. Could I take you back to your childhood, your youth, and ask specifically what led you to the armed forces and the Navy in particular? And
well, firstly,
I'll do that with the help of certain pictures, if I may. We have managed to persuade Commodore Singh to dig into the family archive, pull out some old pictures. So let's start with that, if I may.
Well, to begin with, I had a great childhood. I'm the fourth generation in the military in my family. My great-grandfather fought in World War I. My grandfather was decorated in World War II. My father was, took part in 3 wars after independence. All, of course, but I'm the black sheep in the family, the only one to join the Navy. So, so I remember one very senior officer once, when I was a cadet at the NDA and I was walking with my father, a very senior officer, my father introduced me to him and said, "My son, he's a cadet at the NDA." So, so this general asked my father was a colonel at that time, and he asked me, he said, "So son, are you also planning to join your father's regiment?" And I said, "Sir, well, I'm joining the Navy."
You joining the Navy, yes.
Yeah, so he looked at my father and said, "If I had a son joining the Navy, I'd either shoot him or shoot myself." But anyway, so that banter between the Army and the Navy continues to this day. But nevertheless, It was a fabulous childhood. I was a typical Army brat, as we understand this term being used increasingly now. Studied in 5 or 6 schools, made fabulous friends, childhood friends. We're still in touch. A lot of us joined the military without sort of knowing that the other was joining, and suddenly we discovered each other in NDA after many, many years and said, "Oh, you're here too." And, we continue to be friends to this day, 50 years later. So I think that bonding that the armed forces gives you, because you're living in a sort of an internalized environment. It's very safe. You play a lot of games. You're encouraged to go out and play. We used to be told at 3 o'clock, out of the house, be back before sunset. That's it, every day. You don't expect it to be at home. You're supposed to be going and playing a game or doing something like that. So I think inevitably, while we are not sort of programmed to join the military, I had no intention of joining the armed forces. I never thought I would. But I think somehow that sort of conditioning that you were brought up in sort of draws you to it. I was doing history honors in Delhi University. I was in Hindu college after I finished schooling. I went through the usual school, boarding school, and finally passed out from the public school, Mathura Road, joined history honors in Hindu. And in between, went for my NDA exam, qualified, went for the selection board, qualified. And when I came back after that, here I was this class hero boy. Everyone's telling me, "Boy, you got a job at the age of 17. Wow, you're already settled in life." And you say, "Yeah, man, I'm the cat's whiskers." So, but if you really look at it, we sort of programmed. You're growing up in an environment where sport is very important, outdoors are very important, academics are also important. So you grow into this sort of well-rounded personality, which is ideally suited for the armed forces. You're not expected to be a genius in the armed forces. You're not expected to be a dud, but you're supposed to be generally sort of above average in most things, in sport and in outdoors and academics. And I think so we were sort of, in a way, conditioned for that. So maybe it was an inevitable sort of step that one took at that
Did
stage.
you have this element of service running through the family?
Yes, as I said, my great grandfather fought in the First World War. My
That's right. Yeah.
grandfather fought in the Second World War. He was decorated. The Japanese surrendered to him in Sumatra.
Wow.
My father was in three wars, 62, 65, and 71. And so that's a rich tradition, but I'm the only one in the Navy. Yeah. That's a picture which you're seeing is of my school. I studied in Sherwood College. A lot
You
of
were,
my classmates are
yes,
still colleagues in the armed forces also. So I took my daughters up for a trip once to Nainital and I said, Emma, show you my school. So that picture was taken then.
that is
So
from there.
it's been taken a
Lovely.
few years ago, yes.
This is you as a young cadet. Is this at
That was a
Karakwasa?
cadet. That's Karakwasa, yes. I was in my second last term, I think, in my fifth term. Or maybe my sixth term, I think. It was my final term in the NDA. Yeah, that was
Right.
then. Yeah. So,
Right. And of course, the
so
Navy
that
is
was it.
different from the Army, of course, in terms of being much more of an officer. The proportion of sailors to officers, I think, is vastly different from the Army. Much more of a technical force. Um, so is it leadership of men that dominates, or is it the technical aspects of that dominate in the Navy?
I think the leadership aspect, leading human beings, is the same. I don't think there's too much of difference because here also you're commanding a ship. You're going into battle. You know, a ship is a unit. If it sinks, it takes 300 people down with it. So you've got to motivate people to be able to perform their best at their best all the time. It can be quite an exacting environment to work in at times. It can be tiring. The sea can be very choppy. You're getting tossed around. You're seasick, but you've still got to do your job. You still got to close up on watch. I mean, when you're seasick, fortunately, I was not one of the people who was very often seasick, but it's the
Hmm.
most miserable feeling on earth to be seasick. You know, you just want
Right.
the earth to open up and swallow you whole. I don't want to. I don't want to be around. So it's like that. Well, these two pictures, of course, are of the NDA. You know, this is where you're bonding. You really make your bonding. This is my Squadron, Alpha Squadron, our course. The
Hmm.
Squadron bonding in the NDA is something that will go till the end of your days. I mean,
Right.
even our wives have accepted the fact that your squadron mate is more precious to you than probably anybody else. So, so this is the sort of bonding that you develop over there because you go through so much thick and thin together over those 3 years. You know, it's all for one and one for all.
Right.
So it's amazing how it is. Yeah, and that's where
And
I
and the
think you learn the basics of leadership.
that age, they all end up in the Navy, or
No, no, we were all out of that first picture which you see. We were 23 or 24 of us in my squadron in my course. Three of us
hmm,
joined the Navy. Three joined the Navy. Four joined the Air Force, and the rest went into the Army.
right.
And the picture which you see on the right, we're sitting. It's called a bivak. You know, it's a little tent that you rig up in camp, and you're sort of sitting around. So the guy on the extreme left joined the Air Force. I joined the Navy, and the other two joined the Army. So we were the four who were sharing this bivak. So
That
the guy who joined
that
the Air Force was a pilot. Became a
stay.
The guy who joined the Air Force became a fighter pilot. I joined the
Right.
Navy, and the other two, yeah. So that's what it is. That's where the basic fundamentals of jointmanship, of jointness, are sort of inculcated. That there's no
Right.
difference. We're all in it together, and we've got to support each other in every sort of under all conditions. That, of course, is a picture of when we got married. Soon after, I had about 6 years or 7 years of service. I was already a submariner. My father was still in the army. So this was a nice family snap we took, I think, a month after we got married. The one
He,
on the
he,
left.
he was a colonel then, you said.
No, he'd become a general by then. He retired as a
By then.
general. So
Wow.
by then he was a general. Yeah, yeah. So
And you
that's
were a
that.
submarine. That was the larger part of your service, was it not?
As a submariner?
Yes.
Yes, yes, of course. I joined the submarine arm in '82, and I finished my commands in end of '98. For 16 years, I was actively a submariner on board submarines, except for two
Yeah.
years. 1 year I went for my specialization, and 1 year I went for my staff college. Otherwise, I was on board submarines for 16, 17 years without a
Isn't that
break.
pretty much the start of the Indian Navy's getting boats on board, right? There wasn't a submarine tradition prior to the 80s.
No, we got our first submarines came on the 12th. The first submarine was commissioned on the 8th of December 1967. Uh,
67. Oh,
yeah, so it's the 52-year-old arm, but I've been a part of it now for when I joined, it was in its 15th year in 1982, and we
right.
were part of it then till now. And notwithstanding the fact that you finish your command of submarines, which I finished in '98, but a submarine command is a young man's command. You finish your command by the time you're 35, 36 years old,
Mm.
because you're not expected to be old. It's a tough life.
It is.
You've got to be physically very fit for that. But subsequently, you remain a submariner because you're doing submarine appointments. I came to submarine acquisitions. You could become the Commodore submarines in Bombay or Vizag. You could be related to other submarine jobs in Delhi and in the command. So you do remain a submariner if you're medically fit. A submarine is a voluntary arm. In the Navy, you cannot be forced to join submarines. You volunteer for submarines.
I see.
Yeah. So all of us are volunteers. So we joined because we wanted to join, not because someone told us to join submarines. So submarine
And
arm,
what is that? Because it's very, very, very close quarters, very difficult.
well, it's meant to be, but I suppose once you become a submariner, you sort of get used to that. It's a very crammed environment. There'll be a couple of slides showing the inside of a
That's
submarine, which
true.
is going to be interesting.
Yeah. So
Well,
this is just with your daughter.
yeah, these were both
Is
the
she going to
first
join
one.
the forces as well, or?
Oh well, no, they're both the elder one. The one on the picture on the left on top was she's now over 30. She's 32. She's working in the U.S. She's married and working in the U.S. And my younger daughter, the photograph on the right, she's a
Mhm.
practicing corporate lawyer in Bombay now, in Mumbai.
Okay.
So
So,
yeah,
so that tradition
and
is interrupted at least for a.
interrupted. Yes, yes. Well, and of course, the photograph below is the 50th anniversary of the submarine arm. It was a fantastic event we had in Visakhapatnam. As submariners came from far and near, and it was a great meeting of all your old bosses, your old friends, your juniors, your peers. It was 3 days of fabulous times we had.
Brilliant. I think the not just the enthusiasm, but the great joy you feel at that just
Absolutely.
in your
Yeah.
voice.
It's a unique band of brothers. So, well, that's my father and I. Um, so,
These are more recent, of course. Yes.
yeah.
That's inside the boat.
That's the wardroom of a submarine. A wardroom, an officer's mess on a ship is called a wardroom. So that's the wardroom. We had just come back from a patrol. I think we'd come back after almost 30 days at sea. So you can see everyone's beard because there's no shaving on board. There's a shortage of water. That nobody shaves on board when you're at sea. So you can see all of us looking very ragged. But
So it
everyone's
is
got a
true
smile.
that, submariners are the only ones allowed to grow a beard in the Navy.
No. In the Navy, in fact, it's a tradition that there was a time in the Navy you couldn't just have a mustache. You either had to be clean shaven or you had to have a beard.
Right.
You couldn't just grow a mustache.
You
But
couldn't
that still continues. But now we are allowed to keep a mustache as well.
as
So
well.
this was almost till about 40, 50 years ago. There was no mustaches allowed in the Navy. But you can see we came back, I think, after about 35, 40 days at sea, and there's a smile on everybody's face. So people were still in very high spirits.
Excellent.
And
And the other one with you watching out over the sea.
yeah,
What class boat is this?
that's a kilo class submarine. This is INS Sindhu Kesri, which I commanded. I was also the commissioning weapons officer of the submarine, and then I had the privilege of commanding it later. And this was my last outing, and I was entering harbor after my last outing. Actually, this picture is not very clear, but the skyline of Visakhapatnam is visible in the backdrop. So this was just
I
before
see.
we entered harbor, and then I handed over command, and that was my last submarine command.
That
I
is the last
finished four,
one.
and
Yes.
it was yes. And the one on top is when we were training in the Soviet Union for bringing the kilo class submarines back. I did my anti-submarine warfare specialization in the Soviet Union. So this is good old Soviet Union of the pre-Cold War days, of the Cold War days,
Right.
pre-breakup days.
Yeah.
So
Of
we had a
course, we
great
have
tradition. We had a lot of interaction with them. We got a lot of ships and submarines from there. So this was part of
mainstay
our
of
training
the
over there. Yeah.
That's starting to change, though. But we still have a mix of material, I think.
Yes, very much. I think it's still a very close relationship. It may not be as deep as it was with the Soviet Union, but it's certainly still very close and very strategic, definitely. So this is the
Is this
submarine.
at the Sindhu Kesri or?
Yeah, this is Sindhu Kesri. You see it below. It's at periscope depth. If you were diving, I think a photograph was taken by a ship which was close by. I'm on the periscope in the control room when I was in command. That's the Combat Information Center. We call it the CIC, where all the weapons are, the controls are. And the one on the right is at my final handing over day. Handing over command of the submarine. So taking the salute at the farewell parade on board. If you see, we have to do everything on board the submarine itself. We don't do it ashore, even though there's no space to do it. But we manage one way or another.
This is 98.
This is 98. Yeah. I can't believe it's 22 years ago. Now, this is what the inside of a submarine looks like. What you're seeing on the top, on the left-hand side, is we don't have these kind of submarines yet. This is a Russian Delta class ballistic missile submarine. These are
Right.
the boats which carry the intercontinental ballistic missiles, uh, which are operating somewhere within the depths, and this is the what we call a second strike capability. That means if your nuclear attack is launched on you, uh, a nuclear submarine operating somewhere, your enemy doesn't know where it is. He can launch a second strike back and at the enemy. So
So
India
this
is
is
also now
called the nuclear triad.
this is the most important element of the nuclear triad. That's correct. The the underwater element, the underwater element of the triad. So now
Right.
we've also you remember about 2 years ago there's a submarine called the Arihant, which
Correct.
India has built indigenously. We also going for this capability. All nuclear weapon powers have it. So far, just the five big guys had it. We are the sixth
Hmm.
country now to build our own SS. It's called SSBN. So we are the only sixth country in the world to build an SSBN. That's why I put this illustrative photograph saying that we also are now going to have this capability, and it's being developed further with more
So the
boats
Aryan
coming in
class,
slowly.
which led on from the, I believe it's called the ATV,
That's
is
correct.
a SSBM similar to the
Yeah,
Delta
this
class.
is of course this is much bigger. This is much bigger. Uh, the ATV actually Arihant was actually that's why it was called Advanced Technology Vessel. So it was more of a technology demonstrator than really a capability. So while she's now an operationally capable SSBN, but it's a smaller one. The later ones that are going to be built are going to be much larger, with missiles with longer ranges, etc., etc. So they're going to be far more potent platforms that we're going to have in the next 5-7 years to come. Definitely. What you see below is a hatch. Now, when you go from one compartment to another in a submarine, you go through a hatch like this. There are no doors, and the reason for the hatch is that when this hatch is shut, it seals the compartment. It becomes watertight, the compartment, and it can
Right.
withstand pressure. So, if a submarine gets damaged underwater, you can actually isolate the compartment. So, suppose there's a flooding in, let's say, my second compartment. If I shut the hatch to the fourth compartment, to the third compartment, and the first compartment, I can restrict that flooding to only the second compartment. So submarines have something called reserve buoyancy. That means even if certain amount of the submarine does get flooded, it won't sink by weight. It has that much reserve buoyancy built into it to remain
Right.
afloat
So you could
underwater.
take
It
it
can
out
still
of
be
access.
controlled. So you have to be careful as to how much water comes in. That's why you have these hatches, which can be shut and made absolutely watertight and can be pressurized up to a certain pressure. Each compartment is different. But
Right.
it's quite interesting to see people jumping in and out through these hatches. You've got to rush through when you're closing up at action stations, and
Yeah.
it's quite a sight to watch people jumping through these hatches and going through.
Yeah.
On the top right hand side, of course, is the engine room of a submarine. It's a very cramped space. It's high temperatures. It's the newer submarines, of course, are much better. When we joined, we still were on much older submarines. So there were times when the engine room temperature would be 55 to 60 degrees, and people are
Oh.
still working there. They're
Hmm.
working in that compartment, sweating away, but still working. And what you see on the right hand side below is showing two things. One is, of course, it's a torpedo deck. Those green round things you see are actual washout torpedoes. A
Right.
torpedo is about almost about 6 to 7 meters long, which is about 30 feet long, or maybe even more, and weighs anything from 1,500 to 2,000 kgs.
Right.
So you can imagine that when this torpedo goes and hits a ship at speed, what sort of damages the impact will do, besides the explosion, of course.
The kinetic energy.
Kinetic energy that it develops, yes. And of
Hmm.
course, as I can see from the picture, International Yoga Day is being observed on board the submarine underwater.
So there must be sensible ways to keep your sanity on board
Yes,
such
I think so. I
cramped
think
waters.
so, yes. That's true. Yeah, yeah.
This I
So,
liked
like,
quite a bit.
so like we subma- this only we submariners believe in. Obviously, the surface navy doesn't believe in that, but submariners are convinced that there are only two types of vessels: submarines and their targets. There's nothing else, and that matters.
Very tongue in cheek.
So this is the ship I commanded. After I finished all my commands and I became a captain in the navy. In the rank of captain, you can't command a submarine. So I commanded the ship called INS Jyoti, which is the big ship in the center in the picture above. It's an underway replenishment ship, very integral to fleet operations, because if you don't have fuel to give to ships at sea, they'll have to keep coming back to harbor and interrupting their mission that they're doing.
And INS Jyoti is performing what I believe is called a bunkering operation.
It's doing, if you see the three ships being fueled simultaneously, you can see fuel hoses going to the ship on the right, on the starboard and the port, and there's a ship behind. So at any
For the
given time, we can
Hmm.
fuel three ships together, which is quite a versatile sort of way of operating. And then, of
Indeed.
course, the picture on the right is the Bridge of Jyoti. I think the Bridge of Jyoti was almost as big as the whole submarine. So it was quite a welcome change to sit on a spacious bridge like that and control the ship.
Oh,
And on the right, I'm sitting on the wing of my bridge, of the bridge of the ship. There's the bridge wings. And you can see there's a destroyer in the background, which we are fueling at that time. That's why it's so close in that
I see.
photograph. Yeah.
Yes.
So
So that's
it was a very interesting command. So that's
is there
coming now. Yeah, sorry, coming now to what is the topic of our discussion today? The 71 war. This is Admiral S.M. Nanda, the hero of 71. Really, the chief of the naval staff. He was extremely bold. He took some very bold decisions, which resulted in the Navy being able to do what it did. I think the leadership of the armed forces during the 71 war was exemplary. Field Marshal Manekshaw, then a general, Air Chief Marshal P.C. Lal, and Admiral Nanda. And I think they worked in perfect unison. They may have had their differences, but that did not get reflected on the conduct of battle on ground. And that is how I think India won that spectacular victory. In 16 days, we liberated a country, which is something remarkable. But Admiral
indeed?
Nanda's leadership was something that the Navy talks about even today. He's become a legendary figure. He showed tremendous amount of courage, tremendous amount of confidence in his officers and men, tremendous amount of confidence in his platforms to be able to take some of the bold decisions that naval headquarters took during that war.
And what do you think, leading up to 71 and his leadership as demonstrated in the conduct of naval operations?
You know,
What do you think lay for us the groundwork? What was the Navy like then? Was it a secondary force to the army, and it stepped up in 71? What was at play there?
Yes, actually, yes. Actually, when independence happened and partition happened, the Navy was divided 2/3 and 1/3 between India and Pakistan. As it is after independence, the Royal Navy always believed that the Indian Navy is just meant to protect India's coastline and the and operate as part of the Commonwealth navies, where the Royal Navy would still, the Indian Ocean was called the British Lake in those days. So that was a sort of ethos. But even then, Admiral, Lord Mountbatten did a lot to build up the Indian Navy, because while he was in England, he tried to get as many platforms as we could, and almost till the 70s, late 60s, we were getting all our platforms from the UK.
Right.
The Navy was always actually, India, unfortunately, right after independence, when the 47 incident happened, became very continental in its outlook towards security. We became very Pakistan centric. Then 62 happened, we became China centric. So somehow the maritime domain kept getting neglected. And like we in the Navy always say, again, tongue in cheek, that Delhi being 900 miles away from the sea, the leadership here is pretty sea blind. There's a sea blindness in India because the capital is 900 miles from the sea. But there was a fact to that. So the naval budget, even though very fancy plans were made, in 1948 itself, the first naval plan that was approved talked of 3 aircraft carriers. We still 75 years later, we've still not reached the stage where we've ever had 3 aircraft carriers. So even that had talked of 3 aircraft carriers way back in 1948. But there are various, I mean, it's something that an aircraft carrier is expensive. There've been priorities have been different. But till the late 1950s, the naval budget kept increasing and reached almost 12 to 14% by 1959-60. Then of the defense budget, of the overall defense share of the defense budget, 14 to 15% of the share of the defense budget. Then of course, historical high at that time. And then of course the 62 war happened, and suddenly the Navy became, it all became about building up the army and the air force and the land borders, the land enemy. So by 64, in the 64-65 budget, the actual share fell to only 4%, and it continued to that for many years. In 71, we were a fairly okay Navy, but we weren't a powerful Navy in the real sense of the term. We had an aircraft carrier, we had submarines, but these were all later acquisitions. The Navy had started building up. But the ironical thing is that, anyway, coming now, of course, I'll just come to the present. Maybe we'll go to that later. But today, the Navy's importance is far, far more than it was at that time. It's considered an important element. The maritime domain has become extremely important. The Indo-Pacific is all about the maritime domain now.
Right.
But surprisingly, the Navy, which has always been asking for 18 to 20% of the defense budget, because we understand the Army's requirements are far more. It's a far bigger service. It has commitments 24/7, 365 days of the year. They're practically at war the whole year, in Kashmir and on the LAC and the LOC and everywhere. So Navy
Yes.
understands that it can only ask for that much, and it's quite content with 18 to 20% to meet its requirements. But till about 2014, we had actually reached about 17 to 18%. And the amazing thing was that this government, which talked about national security as its priority, and Arun Jaitley, when he became finance minister and defense minister, said maritime security is my topmost priority,
Mhm.
brought the budget down. Today, we barely get 14% of the budget. We are back to where we were in pre-1962 days.
So
And this
is
is
there an argument to be made for a better teeth to tail allocation in the armed forces budget?
absolutely, absolutely. Conventionally, what you say is that the ideal composition of an armed force should be uh, about 25% legacy equipment, 15 to 25% legacy equipment, about 40%, 45% contemporary equipment, and about 35% looking at the future. That's a
In
sort of
terms
100% breakdown. Should be broadly. I mean, it's not laid down anywhere. This is the sort of thought process that goes on when planning is done.
right.
Today, we are sitting on almost 35 to 40% legacy equipment, almost 40% of contemporary equipment. Contemporary means coming or on the way, and
Hmm.
very little, only about 15% is being dedicated to the future,
Right.
which is not a very healthy ratio to be in. So this is
Hmm.
something that the chiefs have been flagging at various levels, and every time we are told that this has been understood and everything's fine, but somehow the money is not coming. I know there are people who say that. Now, for example, now COVID is something that was unforeseen,
Right.
but COVID, but I believe and I think it's something that one must understand that COVID might be, while it's affecting people today, it's got very long-term implications for national security because navies don't get built in a day. Navies take years to build.
Decades even. Yeah.
So if you need something in 2030, you've got to start worrying about it today, and
Right.
you've got to start allocating money from today for that. And with the way where our neighbors are going, which we'll come to perhaps later, but we really have to look at it very carefully. We are
We'll
not
come to
getting
that in a
our
minute.
share. Yeah, we'll come to
But
that
just
later.
back to 1971, and what we
Yes,
see these lovely pictures of these missile boats, the OSA class, called the Veer class in India, if I recollect correctly.
that's correct. Named after the first of the class. Yes, yes,
It's named after the first of the class.
yes.
These were little craft, but packed a big punch, did they not?
That's correct. So we got
Tell
these
us
boats in the late
what
60s.
the acquisition of this craft, why the Navy went from perhaps a warship kind of operation to these fast fleet missile boats.
Yeah, any blue water navy has to have a full spectrum capability. So it's not just about having. You've got to work out what ratio you want your big ships to small ship ratio should be. The OSA class missile boats, which came to us in the late 60s, when we got a lot of equipment from the former Soviet Union, we got the 4 submarines, we got Petya class frigates, we got the submarine depot ship Amba, and we got these missile boats. They were armed. Each of them were little boats armed with 4 Styx missiles. It was called the P-15, the P-15 missile, otherwise
Hmm.
known as the Styx, which had been quite successful in the '67 Arab-Israeli war as well, used
Yes,
extensively by the Arabs.
not.
But it had mixed success in the '67 war.
Hmm.
Notwithstanding that, so these boats were very powerful. They used to do very high speeds, but they were limited, obviously, in their endurance, in their range of how far they could operate because of their size.
And
And
how
so,
large were they? What was the crew complement?
oh, the crew was only, I think, only about 20 something. Very, very small complement. Just 2 officers on board. That's all.
Hmm. Hmm.
Uh, I think 2 executive officers and 1 engineer officer. So probably 3 officers on board. That's about it.
Right.
But I think it was all about, and that is why when 71 started, this decision to use the missile boats was met with a little bit of trepidation by some quarters in the navy.
Hmm.
So one of the hallmarks of Admiral Nanda's admiralship was that if he was ever in not very confident, not very sure of how he should take something forward, he
Hmm.
would actually go and talk to people who were actually doing that job. He'd go down to Mumbai, he'd sit with young officers, ask them for their ideas, say, look, this is what we need to do. How do you think we can execute it best? Because they were the people on the spot, they were the people operating the ships. And this idea to use missile boats in the 71 war actually came from the junior leadership.
Oh, it did. Okay.
Notwithstanding that, nearer the war, when all the commanders in chief and all assembled in Delhi to meet and discuss, The Flag Officer Commanding-in-Chief, Western Naval Command, Admiral Kohli, who later became the chief, was not very sure of how effective these missile boats will be. And obviously, he was the operational man on the spot, so it was perfectly justified in being a little trepidant in deploying something in such an unconventional manner as was being envisaged by the Navy at that time. So he expressed his reservations, and from what I've read of the official history of the Navy, the chief and he went to the chief's office after that. They had a chit chat, and he said, "If you order me to do it, I will do it." But I thought as the commander in chief, I must express my reservations as well, which I think was absolutely justified, because you've got to understand both sides of the story and then take a considered decision after that. After all, you're sending people into war.
Of course.
So I think it was a well thought out decision to send the missile boats into the operation. It was called Operation Trident, which will probably the next slide might.
Tried to execute it the second night of the war, if I recollect.
That's correct. The war, you see, on the 23rd of November, Pakistan declared a state of emergency. So obviously, the inevitability of war was there. I mean, everyone knew that war was going to break out sooner or later. Yahya Khan had more or less made that clear to his forces. They were already at high readiness and everything. So by the later part of November, the Western Naval Command positioned four missile boats off Okha, which is almost halfway to Karachi from Mumbai.
Of the Gujarat coast.
Of the Gujarat coast. So that was how they were going to probably deploy them, which perhaps the Pakistan Navy did not appreciate or understand that this could be the sort of for what was going to come later.
Pakistan not know the acquisition of these boats and they're like
I'm sure they would have known the location, because I'm sure they were keeping that much of an eye on things, but perhaps they didn't anticipate what was going to happen. It must have thought these boats are being positioned for defense of Okha or whatever. And you know what had happened in 1965? The Indian Navy had been sort of fettered by the political leadership into playing a very defensive role. I mean, the Pakistan Navy was able to carry out an attack on Dwarka, and the Indian Navy was not allowed to retaliate.
Right, so it became a coastal defense force.
Yes, and so the Chief of Naval Staff, Admiral Soman, at that time expressed his reservations to the Prime Minister. He went and met Prime Minister Shastri also. And the reason for this, surprisingly, was the fact that there was this perception in the leadership, political leadership, that the Pakistan Navy is far better armed than the Indian Navy, which perhaps is not entirely untrue. They had already got their first submarines by then. We had no submarines. They had ships on loan from the US and the Brits and everybody. So that perception was there, but the naval chief still wanted to go into battle. I mean, that's what the navies are for.
Yes.
And so there was a lot of sense of frustration in the Navy. There was an effect on the morale of the men that, look, we don't seem to count as a service. Here, India is fighting a full-scale war, and the Navy is not required to do anything. So I think the Navy was smarting from that as well. So it was about proving a point. I think it was all about proving a point. And Admiral Kohli in his book has written that I took it as a personal thing to sort of, to overcome that humiliation I felt as the Deputy Chief of Naval Staff in 1965. He was the Deputy Chief of Naval Staff. And he says, I said to myself at that time that if another war happens, and if I'm in a position to make a difference, I will make that difference. Right. So it was that sort of sense of smarting that, the Navy was operating in, that we have to prove ourselves, we have to prove a point, which I think gave that little bit of added motivation to be a little more daring than perhaps under conventional circumstances they would have been. But that, of course, is a conjecture.
On the 3rd of December 1971, these three missile boats, the Nipat was one, INS Nipat.
Nipat, Nirghat, and Veer. There were four missile boats positioned at Okha, of which one was told to continue patrolling of Okha, because they had to protect that harbor as well. And three boats were detached, Nipat, Nirghat, and Veer. They were to what we call RV, rendezvous to slightly larger Petya class ships. Petya class ships had better radars, better communication facilities. Right. So they were required to escort these missile boats. So they met them at sea. And on the third,
frigates, are they not?
I beg your pardon?
Petya class are frigates.
Yeah, they were actually corvettes, they were large corvettes. So we treated them more like frigates. So perhaps if you come to the next slide, you'll see the sort of deployment.
So we see the Gujarat coast and.
So this operation was called Operation Trident. So if you see the upper black line, that is the ships based at Okha.
Hmm.
So from there, the complete force left. When they were about 70 miles short of Karachi, so they left on the third afternoon. On the fourth afternoon, the war broke out on third evening. The first airstrikes came from the Pakis on the third night. The preemptive airstrikes. So
Hmm.
on the fourth afternoon, the ship sailed out from Okha, fourth morning,
Right.
and when they were 70 miles short of Karachi, uh, Nirghat detected a contact was detected in the southwest, about 45 miles by the Petya radar, and another contact was detected on the southeast, on the northeast of Karachi, southeast of Karachi, northeast of the ships,
Hmm.
at about 40 miles, 42 miles. So the task force commander, who was the commanding officer of one of the Petyas, Captain Gopal Rao, then Commander Gopal Rao, he detached Nirghat to carry out an attack on the contact on the northwest, and Nipper to carry out an attack on the contact on the northeast. So
Right.
they both these missile boats fired two missiles each at the targets they were assigned, and both the missiles of both the ships hit their respective targets, and both the ships first suffered damage and then sank. So
And
later
this
on,
is
it
the
was
first
discovered.
use of missiles in anti-ship missiles in the Indian theater.
That is correct. That was the first time I think we used missiles. The first time we really had missiles in the Indian Navy to use. Before that, it was all gun warfare in
Hmm.
navies all over the world.
Hmm.
So Nirgat's attack, which was on the two missiles fired at the contact in the northwest, turned out to have hit PNS Khyber, which was one of the major warships of the Pakistan Navy. And she went down after the second missile was hit. First missile reduced the speed, second missile brought her to a halt, and she slowly sank. The vessel on the northeast was a merchant ship called Venus Challenger. Now, Venus Challenger was a merchant ship which was hugging the coast and trying to enter Karachi harbor. While the Pakistani said, "Oh, it was carrying rice," and the Indians have, deviously sunk a merchant ship, it was actually carrying U.S. ammunition for Pakistan from Saigon. This ship
Hmm.
had sailed from Saigon with the Americans having loaded with
Hmm.
ammunition. So it was a
Hmm.
huge explosion. Venus Challenger's explosion was huge, and she went down within minutes.
I
So these were
see.
the two attacks carried out by these two missile boats. Now, Ines Veer had some engine trouble, so she was coming and she had slowed down for a while till the engine trouble was rectified. So she was coming up from behind. In the meantime, a third contact was detected coming out from Karachi. So it was actually north of the ships. So Veer was ordered to fire on that particular contact, which turned out to be a Pakistani minesweeper called Muhafiz. Muhafiz was actually coming to relieve Khyber on patrol because Khyber was having problems. So Muhafiz was the third ship that was sunk. So in one night, in this sort of lightning attack, these two warships and a merchant ship full of ammunition was sunk by the Indian Navy.
Just in the
Now
space
before
of an hour or
yeah,
two.
in the space of less than about an hour and a half, yes.
Right.
And Nirgat was also told thereafter by the commander of the task force that your remaining missiles you fire at the oil tank, we call it, where the oil tanks were in Karachi harbor. So two
Right.
missiles were fired there, and there was a huge fire in the Karachi harbor
And
of
at that time, Karachi
oil tanks
was
catching fire. And
right.
Karachi was the only port which Pakistan had. They had no other deep sea port. So the complete naval facility was there. And this
Right.
fire, which these oil
Train.
tanks, so this fire actually took almost 3.5 days to douse. So it was, it kept Karachi ablaze for 3.5 days. And the ships quickly turned around immediately after these attacks and promptly returned to Bombay.
Fired all
So
their, what is it, 12 missiles.
yes, no, I think they kept one or two back. They always, I mean, everything wouldn't be fired,
Right.
but yeah, not all 12, but I think
Mm.
four, 8, and probably 9, 10 missiles must have been fired. Yes, and then of
Right.
course they returned to Mumbai harbor.
Made back for
Uh,
home.
yes, headed back home after a very successful attack. No casualties, no damage to ships, nothing. So this took Pakistan. And the amazing thing was that Pakistan, despite knowing that we have these missile boats, right till the end, the reason why there was no counter attack, one always wondered how come they didn't counter attack after they were attacked. Because right till the end, these ships which were attacked kept reporting that we've been attacked by aircraft. They saw
Right.
these incoming missiles coming in, they thought these were aircraft. And so they launched major anti aircraft gunfire from the ships, from ashore, from everywhere. There were no aircraft in the air, it was ships which turned around. So, right
So,
till the end, they were mistaken for aircraft.
so what was
That
it?
the
Actually, an event of surprise, or
It was surprise because,
tactical win?
yes, I think it was mainly the element of surprise because they never expected missile boats. It never even crossed their mind that this could be a missile attack from the Indian Navy.
So,
Even
and
after,
essentially, for the war gamers who
yeah,
planned this.
yeah, it was very well planned. It was an extremely well planned operation, and that is why the Navy is so proud of it. And it's called Killers Day. These boats are called the Killers. And
Mm,
today,
mm.
even today,
Yeah,
Fourth of Navy is celebrated as the Navy Day. So
correct. Of course, it is. Yes.
yeah,
So,
but
and the three boats made back for Mumbai, accompanied by the two
Patriot class frigates, yeah, the Patriot class corvettes frigates, yes,
INS,
yes.
a bunker ship as well, no? INS Posha.
That's correct. That tanker was there, but she was detached. She was waiting far. I mean, she wasn't really the scene of the action. She was
Right.
astern.
And why is
You know,
that? Because these boats had a very limited range.
that's correct. So because that's why they were positioned at Okha because there was no way they could have made it from Mumbai to Karachi.
I
Uh,
see. I
they
see.
couldn't have reached with the endurance, and that's why probably the Pakistan Navy didn't think that a missile boat attack would be launched.
Would be launched. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
So if you remember, if a few days later there was a second missile attack on Karachi called Operation Python, which I'll be coming to
Operation.
subsequently.
So,
Yeah, in that,
ambitious plan in conception and execution.
absolutely, absolutely. So in Operation Python, because the boats were coming in from further south, they were not coming in from Okha, they were coming in from further south, so they were actually towed. They were towed by bigger ships till they came within their endurance range and then let loose and carried out this attack. And again took Pakistan by surprise, which is what was really amazing.
Which is amazing. Yes, one
Yeah,
wouldn't
yeah.
expect that. And how many missile boats did India have at that time?
We had eight at that time, and eight more came later after the war.
And did all eight see battle?
I think 5 or 6 saw battle. I don't think all 8 saw. I'm not really sure how many were actually at the scene of the battle.
This is a real feather in the cap. Boats sort of commissioned only months prior, inflicting this tremendous wound on the Pakistan Navy.
Yeah, very good leadership, I would say. The missile boat group commander, Commander became a Commodore later. BB Yadav got a Mahavir Chakra. The task force commander, Commodore Gopal Rao, got a Mahavir Chakra. All the CEOs of the missile boats which carried out the attack got Veer Chakras. So I think it was a, and in the Navy, when you say that the commanding officer got a Veer Chakra, well, obviously he takes the courageous decision to go and carry out the attack. But it's actually an award to the ship. The ship as a unit has performed brilliantly. It's not an individual award. It's more of a recognition of the ship's performance.
Crew of 20 who enabled it. Yeah.
Yes, that's correct.
And what did Operation Trident, do you think tactically? What did it do? Did it cripple or essentially locate?
Yes. What surprised? Two things happened. That's right. Two things happened. You see, for Python, what they did was they knew that Karachi was now being very heavily fortified. There were constantly aircraft in the air carrying out surveillance, civil aircraft, military aircraft. They had requisitioned all the aircraft from the Pakistan Flying Club. Their pilots were flying them. So they were keeping a constant watch over Karachi because they didn't want a second attack on Karachi. So when Python was thought of, INS Mysore, which was the cruiser, one of the big cruisers. We had Delhi and Mysore. We had 2 big cruisers. Mysore was sent with 3 ships to carry out attacks on the rest of the Makran coast, and not on Karachi. That's the rest of that's ports like Jivani, Gwadar, the smaller ports which Pakistan had.
Right.
So this was supposed to be a diversionary tactic. So moment Pakistanis detected that the big ships are going off towards Jivani and Gwadar and all, they thought probably that's where the next attack is going to come. And so the vigil on Karachi probably reduced a bit. Though the Pakistanis insist, if you read their account of the war, that it wasn't so. But nevertheless. And in the meantime, the smaller ships came in to carry out an attack on Karachi, carried out the attack and turned around and again headed back. So if you see the second, if you see the green lines, this is Operation Python. The Mysore group has gone off towards further west, towards Jivani.
Right.
And the missile boats have carried out an attack from where those lines are sort of converging. It's headed towards Karachi, carried out an attack and rushed back and met this force again and come back to Mumbai. So finally, Mysore and all didn't even carry out an attack. Though everyone said, oh, well, since Mysore and all were there, they should have carried out an attack in any case on the Pakistani Makran coast, just to demoralize the enemy. But later on, when these people were asked, they said, well, there's nothing there to attack. It was jungle. So what were you attacking? Why waste missiles and weapons and ammunition on targets that are not going to achieve anything? So I think that was justified. So both these attacks, both these operations were very successful operations. We didn't lose any ship. No ships were damaged, no lives lost, and inflicted a lot of damage on the Pakistan Navy. We sank their only tanker, PNS Dhaka. PNS Dhaka had been kept disguised off the harbor, as a merchant ship so that it wouldn't get attacked. But we managed to sink Dhaka, and we sank two more merchant ships, a British merchant ship and a Pakistani merchant ship, which were at that time in Karachi harbor. So in effect, while we may not have inflicted as much damage as we did on the first attack, and of course we took out an oil tank also in Karachi, which the Pakistani, if you read the Pakistani account of the war, they said the Indian firing was so inaccurate that it missed our ships and hit our oil tank, which was not actually the case. So anyway, so besides the physical damage that we inflicted of the oil tanks, sinking Pakistan Navy's only tanker, PNS Dhaka, sinking so many warships, it demoralized the Pakistan Navy to an extent that they called all their ships back to harbor.
I see.
All the ships came back to harbor, and then they were told, please reduce the amount of weaponry and ammunition that you're carrying. Now, this was very demoralizing to the Pakistan Navy. Because, in the middle of a war, if someone tells you, please reduce the ammunition you're carrying, it means what? That the war is over as far as you're concerned.
And
the reason for telling them to do this was that with these ships so heavily armed, with so much ammunition, if another missile lands in Karachi harbor, the explosion there would be of an unimaginable magnitude. So it's better that the ships have less ammunition, less damage will happen. So if you really look at it, dispassionately, they'd already assumed that, they're going to get hit. So I think it was a psychological effect more than the physical damage that was done. Secondly, the sinking of the merchant ships succeeded in effectively blockading Karachi. No ships are going to come, no merchant ships are going to enter a port which is being attacked. So that's totally severed the logistic lifelines for Pakistan of anything coming in from anywhere, whether it was military equipment or it was food or oil or whatever it may have been. So this was really
the war fighting capabilities.
That's correct. Greatly affected the war fighting capability. No doubt about that.
Right. So by this time, Pakistan would have understood that these missile boats were the ones inflicting all of this damage.
Yes, of course. Yes.
And how did they come back? Because of course, then the subsequent loss of our ship, the Kukri.
That happened a little later. There's a slide on that also. If you go a little, this is a missile being fired from a missile boat. Now, this is INS Kukri led. The commanding officer was Captain Mahendranath Mullah, a very, very sort of distinguished naval officer from a very distinguished lineage. His father was a famous Justice A.N. Mullah, who was very famous.
Yes.
Now, Kukri and Kirpan were two ships which were carrying out anti-submarine patrols. We knew Pakistan had a very potent submarine force. They had 3 Daphne class submarines, which were at that time the latest French submarines in the market, and Pakistan had 3 of them. So from a submarine perspective, Pakistan was extremely well armed, and there was more or less positive intelligence that one of the submarines is going to be operating somewhere off Mumbai in Indian waters in an offensive role. So these ships had been sent out. They were anti-submarine frigates, Kirpan, Kiltan, and Kuthar, 3 of them, out of which one had engine trouble, so one came back to harbor. 2 went out to sea, which included Kukri. And of course, they came in contact with the submarine. Submarine had probably better detection ranges, picked up Kukri before Kukri could pick it up, carried out a torpedo attack, fired 2 torpedoes. The first torpedo missed Kiltan, actually, not Kukri. The second one hit Kukri, and the third one again missed. They actually fired 3 torpedoes, out of which one hit and sank Kukri. So Kukri went down in a few minutes. Captain Mullah decided to go down with his ship. He was the last man on board, and people who survived, there were very few survivors actually. People who survived say that he was sitting on his chair, the captain's chair, with a cigarette, and went down sitting in that sort of posture. And his own life jacket he gave to one of his sailors and said, "You jump off." So I think it was a great act of great courage.
Yes.
It sort of reaffirmed your faith in naval leadership.
Yes.
This sort of act. And that is why today also he's remembered with great reverence by everybody in the Navy, Captain Mullah. But from an operational perspective, there were questions raised. Why was Kukri not doing what an anti-submarine ship is supposed to do? Because an anti-submarine ship, when it is expected to be in a submarine operating area, is supposed to be carrying out certain evasive steering maneuvers. It's supposed to be zigzagging. It's supposed to be doing high speed. Kukri at that point of time was not doing that. And the reason apparently for that was that there was some new equipment which had been fitted on board Kukri, which was supposed to give higher detection ranges for submarines at lower speeds of the ship. Because the higher the speed of a ship, the more is the self noise it generates, and the more self noise it generates, the worse becomes the performance of the sonar, which is trying to pick up a signal from another unit, because your own sort of ship noise starts swamping your own sonar. So this particular equipment, which had been fitted, had been developed by our defense and by, I think, by either Bhabha Atomic Research Center or DRDO. I'm not sure, one of them. So that had been fitted on Kukri, and Kukri was operating the way it should have operated with that equipment. Obviously, that equipment didn't prove itself. The submarine picked up Kukri earlier and carried out an attack. So that was a loss, a major loss for the Navy. I mean, while we were still sort of, the Navy was doing a great job, but Kukri's loss was a bit of a blow, and it was a sad loss of life. There were just 6 officers and I think 39 sailors who survived. So that was sad. Definitely a sad day in the Indian Navy's history. But I think some valuable lessons were learned, and I think if valuable lessons are learned,
if I have my facts right, in war.
I beg your pardon? Sorry.
Only lost Indian Navy ship in war.
Yeah, that's correct. That's correct. We've never lost a ship otherwise, or even damaged. None of our ships were damaged either in the 71 war. But we learned valuable lessons from that loss about operating ships in a submarine environment, about sort of, the damage control drills to be performed on board, things like that. So I think if lessons were learned and implemented, well, it wasn't a loss in vain. Let me put it that way.
Moving to the Eastern Command, the Eastern Theater. So this, of course, is an image of the Vikrant, the famous Vikrant, here off the waters of Visakhapatnam, I would imagine.
Yeah, that's correct. Vikrant had been sent to the East Coast. Again, an aircraft carrier is a major psychological weapon that you have. It sort of gives the Navy a lot of heft that you have an aircraft carrier. It's a floating airfield. A floating airfield that can move 300 miles in a day. So that's a tremendous psychological boost the Navy gets. But, conversely, the loss of an aircraft carrier would be a tremendous psychological blow to a Navy and to a country.
Indeed.
Here's your most protected asset. And if an enemy submarine or an enemy missile can attack that, it means you're so vulnerable that you couldn't even protect your most valuable asset. So there's always this trepidation about deploying an aircraft carrier at the actual scene of action, because you're scared that it could get damaged. So there was a lot of discussion on how should Vikrant be used in the 71 war. She was your most prized asset. Somebody said let her operate off Cochin. Somebody said, well, keep her near Mumbai, send her out only on selective missions, keep her out at sea. Finally, a decision was taken that she will operate on the eastern seaboard, because it was important that the Bay of Bengal, we had to cut off the supply lines between West Pakistan and East Pakistan. So it was important that the Bay of Bengal, we had maritime superiority there to prevent any West Pakistani naval ships or supply ships coming from the West Coast to the East Coast. So Vikrant was deployed on the East Coast, and it did a remarkable job over there. She went on to off Bangladesh, off East Pakistan, and literally bombarded Chittagong Harbour, Cox's Bazar, shore installations, all the merchant ships that were there in Chittagong Harbour, relentlessly from the 4th of December to the 13th of December. Every day attacks went in and literally broke the back of the Pakistan Navy and, in a way, the army, because no logistics, they couldn't supply logistics across the land border because India was there, and now they couldn't even do it from sea. So it actually broke the back. It actually broke the back of the Pakistani army in the military, the Pakistani armed forces in East Pakistan. Vikrant's action. So she did a great job, I think.
Force with Vikrant in the lead, of course, the capital ship. But shore operations conducted essentially by Vikrant's air arm, or
Vikrant's air arm. The Elysees were flying in every day. Elysees were these anti-submarine aircraft, French of French origin. They were going in every day and carrying out bombardment attacks. Though basically an Elysee is an anti-submarine warfare aircraft primarily, but here it was being used to carry out shore bombardment. So they were actually going and bombing everything there, all the shore installations, all the harbor installations, all the port installations. The other aircraft on the Vikrant was the Seahawks. The Seahawks were the fighters, like the fighter jets.
Hmm.
But Seahawks need certain weather conditions to operate in those days, and the winds were not very favorable. So the Seahawks could not be launched every day. The Seahawks were launched, I think, on 4 or 5 days because other days the winds were not favorable. But the
I
Alizés
see.
were relentless in their attack. Then, of course, we had just got the Seeking helicopters. They were used very effectively. So the Indian Navy operated in great unison. The air arm, the submarine arm, the surface forces, and literally established full maritime superiority in the Bay of Bengal, what we call sea control, and air superiority in the Bay of Bengal and
So
over East Pakistan.
would you say then that this was a coming to age of the Indian Navy?
Yes, yes, absolutely. I think the 71 war showed that the Indian Navy had matured. It had matured to be able to carry out a full spectrum sort of operation in two theaters of war without any losses, which spoke volumes for the training, for the planning skills, for the courage of the men, and the results it delivered were phenomenal. I mean, while the army did what it did, I think the attacks on Karachi and on the harbors of Bangladesh, Cox's Bazar, Chittagong, etc., really broke the logistic back of the Pakistan armed forces and really
Hmm.
affected their war fighting capability. So
And
the
when we
Navy did a
think
great
of
job.
IT today, we of course think of the sea lanes of communication and
We,
what keeps the the flow of men, material to
that's
effectively
right.
fight a war.
That's extremely important. That's absolutely true, and that's very, very important. So we had actually blocked the sea lines of communication between West and East Pakistan. No merchant ships were either coming to East Pakistan or to West Pakistan from anywhere in the world. And so logistically, they were very constrained. And
Hmm.
so I think it was a
We had
great operation.
on the loss of the Ghazi, PNS Ghazi,
Yes.
which was lost perhaps to an accident uh, of Vishakhapatnam.
Yeah, you see, Ghazi was actually a U.S. Tench class submarine. It was a very old submarine. It was more or less a World War II vintage submarine, a little later than that. But she was the only one which had the sort of logistic legs to be able to transit all the way to the Bay of Bengal and operate there. The Daphnes were much smaller, so Daphnes were good for closer range, more potent weaponry. So
Hmm.
there was a view in the Indian Navy that Ghazi is going to be somewhere in the Bay of Bengal if they deploy it, because that's the only submarine they have which they can send to the Bay of Bengal. There's no other
Right.
submarine in the Pakistan Navy that can come into the Bay of Bengal. And obviously, it was expected that Ghazi will come looking for Vikrant. That
Yes.
was expected because
That's
taking out Vikrant was a major, sort of aim of the Pakistan Navy was to get Vikrant somehow. So when Ghazi came into Vizag, a lot of misinformation was spread, by which is a very important tool of warfare. So
hmm.
Ines Rajput was told that, look, we know probably that there's a submarine outside. We think there is. So you go out to sea and pretend to be Vikrant and send
Ah.
out messages saying that Vikrant is sending these messages. Let the enemy think Vikrant is sending these messages. So these false messages were purposely put on unclassified communication circuits, which
Hmm.
were all
Hmm.
intercepted by the Pakistan Navy.
Hmm.
Messages like a sailor from Vikrant making a signal regarding a sailor saying his mother is ill. Please tell us what are her present medical condition. Things like
Right.
that.
A decoy.
Yeah, a decoy. Then Chennai Naval Base was told that, look, Vikrant is coming, so please stock up rations for Vikrant. So which is
Hmm.
a huge quantity. And if the naval officer in charge there was wondering what the hell is happening. Why is so many rations required? He was told. So
Yeah.
these messages were going that so it was anticipated that Vikrant would be operating in the Madras Vizag axis in that part of the Bay of Bengal, whereas
Hmm.
Vikrant was actually east of the
Ra-
Andaman and Nicobar Islands also. He had
Hmm.
been put east of the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, and she was absolutely on radio silence, no communication.
Hmm.
So Ghazi was operating off Vizag and waiting for Vikrant to come, go, whatever, to find out more about Vikrant and attack it. Now Rajput was decoying this as a decoy for Vikrant as far as Ghazi was concerned. So when Rajput entered harbor and then was leaving for another such sortie, she thought when she was leaving harbor, she thought she saw a disappearing contact, something moving, water disturbance,
Hmm.
just about 50 meters, in less than 50 meters of water off Vizag.
I see.
So she assumed it's a submarine and did drop depth charges there to sort of disturb the submarine or attack it, and continued on its passage thereafter. Later that night, this huge explosion was heard by everybody in Vizag. People living in ashore in houses in town in the colonies also said we heard this loud explosion, and the
Hmm.
port control and all saw this huge ball of fire sort of a thing coming up. So this was on the third night. This was the night of the 3rd of December. This happened. Uh, Divers went on the 4th or the 5th. The weather was bad. They couldn't go till the 5th, and various things happened. But nevertheless, finally it was proven. The divers went down and saw the submarine, felt the submarine. They knew it was Ghazi, which had sunk. Later on, so it was assumed that it was Rajput's depth charges which had sunk Ghazi. But
Right.
later on, after it was all examined and the inquiry was held and more detailed investigations done, it was discovered by most people who felt the submarine, who went and actually saw it underwater, the
Hmm.
divers and all, that the submarine had exploded outwards, not inwards. So
Right.
obviously something inside had exploded, because of which the hull was sort of exploding outwards.
Hmm.
Had it been an external explosion, the hull would have caved inwards.
It would have crushed the hull as
It
opposed
would have
to.
crushed the hull inward instead of opening the hull out.
Hmm.
So what perhaps could have happened, and now of course it's conjecture, there's no one alive to tell the tale, is that
Hmm.
in that dive which Ghazi probably did to avoid being detected by Rajput,
Hmm.
in that much water, she may have either dived too fast and hit bottom. That could be one reason. Maybe she was charging batteries, so she had to quickly shut off her battery charging and dive, which led to a lot of hydrogen being generated on board. Batteries, when they are suddenly charging is stopped, they need to be ventilated. If you can't ventilate them in a submarine, then it leads to a higher hydrogen percentage coming up. And high hydrogen means it's inflammable. So it could
Right.
have been a hydrogen explosion, a battery
Hmm.
explosion inside. It could be one of the mines when she hit the bottom, maybe with that impact, a mine inside could have gone off. So nobody really knows what exactly caused the explosion, but it is reasonably believed that Rajput may have triggered this action by Ghazi, which led to her sort of internal explosion happening.
Right.
But yeah, it was most likely Ghazi sank of her own sort of explosion happening within the submarine, and not because of a direct attack by an Indian naval ship. That has been established more or less beyond doubt now. But
Right.
this was a big blow to the Pakistan Navy, because Ghazi was supposed to be out there and be able to do what she was
Perhaps
sent out to do.
damage. Instead, she was lost.
Instead, she was lost. Yeah.
Now, if
So
we
that
if we
was.
take a step
So
back from.
even now there is a Ghazi wreck. When we navigate, we keep clear of the Ghazi wreck.
I
She was never
see.
salvaged. There were offers made to salvage her, but the Indian government decided to let her remain where she is. We have
Hmm.
debris and all in the submarine museum in Vizag. There is debris of Ghazi. There is a broken something or the other. There are a few broken parts, pages of a logbook. That's all being displayed in the Maritime Museum in Vishakhapatnam.
Hmm.
So that's all there even now.
Back in the one of the specificities of the missile boat strikes or the loss of the Kukri, or indeed the loss of the Ghazi. And why do you think was it superior admiralship on the Indian side? Was the preparation for the 71 war superior? What led to this emphatic win, from the naval perspective and the overall conduct of the war? And here
Look,
you could feel free to talk about the political content
yeah.
of that leadership too.
No, I think the primary reason for India winning the war as decisively as it did in that short period of time was exemplary leadership. There's no doubt about that at every level, whether it was the commanders of the field, whether it was the commanders in chief conducting their respective theaters, or it was Delhi. And I think Sam Manekshaw's famous chat with Indira Gandhi has become legendary now, where he told her that, "Madam, I'm not ready in April," and that's all become the stuff of legend now and folklore. But I think while he was the most charismatic and the army chief, I think he had the support of the other two chiefs to be able to say that.
Hmm.
And so the other two chiefs also believed that here was a victory to be had and we could do it. But we had to do it the way we felt we could do it. And I think that 6 or 7 months that we got was helped a great deal in being able to prepare ourselves to be able to execute the battle, the plans, the sort of thought process, preparing the troops, preparing the ships, getting them adequately armed, exercising them extensively. So I think that 7 or 8 months that we got were very good. But obviously, it was the leadership at every level, whether it was the commanding officers on board who were able to actually go and execute those actions, or it was the fleet commanders at sea, or the commanders in chief who were very brave and bold, whether it was Admiral Krishna on the East Naval Command, or General Arora. General Sagat Singh is become legendary for his
Yes.
leadership of that corps. So it was at every level. I think it was, and of course, it was the courage of the Indian soldier. I mean, that you cannot take that away. ever in any Indian operation, it ultimately boils down to the valor and courage of the Indian soldier, who is who is second to none. You know, absolutely. There is no two ways about that. And I feel proud to have led men like that. Uh,
Hmm.
in my service.
Indeed.
So it
Speaking
was a,
of
and
what
if you
to,
look at, sorry, if you
sorry,
look at
sir.
the enemy, if you look at
Yes.
Pakistan, perhaps, and that was their single biggest weakness was poor leadership, right from the top again, right up from the top, right up to the last man. You know, there was this prisoner of war. In one of the prisoners of war was this Havaldar Abdul Hamid, who was a 400 meters gold medal winner at the previous Asian Games. And he said in an interview, he said, if we had the kind of officer leadership that the Indian Navy had, Indian Armed Forces had, we'd have won the war. You know, that was
I
the sort of thing. He said our officers just sent us out. They didn't lead from the front. Whereas here it was leading from the front, and that continues to this day. Kargil was all about leading from the front.
think there is
You know,
then a moral aspect to the conduct of war. Are certain wars more just than others? And that reflects in the leadership in the execution of that war.
I absolutely agree with you. I think 71 showed India in very, very good light. Here we liberated a country in 16 days, unprecedented in the annals of history. We took
Hmm.
93,000 prisoners of war. We were an occupying army. In a way, if you look at it, we were an occupying army. We did not stay there one extra day. We handed over power to the legitimate civilian government of that country, recognized it, and withdrew. Otherwise, whenever occupation army, they were withdrawn so easily.
Never.
And notwithstanding that, even though we were in the ascendant on the west, on the western seaboard and the western borders, we called a ceasefire immediately as soon as Bangladesh was liberated. Otherwise, we could have gone and continued prosecuting that war. Pakistan was on the back foot there on the west also, but we called
Hmm.
it an end there because we felt that the aim of executing that war had been met. India was forced to go into that war. One, of course, was because of all the genocide that was being committed in East Pakistan. And secondly, because there were 3 million refugees in India. We could not take this load of refugees coming in from there. We had to do something about it.
Right.
And that was, I think, what triggered the initial actions by India of having gone into that country was basically to stem this thing and give justice to the people there and justice to the legitimately elected government of that country. So I think from a moral perspective, we took the moral high ground.
Sorry. I was going to say a difficult question, if I may. Having won the 71 war so comprehensively, achieved great success in the conduct of that war and the creation of Bangladesh, the moral element of statecraft too. Why then do you think India's Pakistan problem persists?
Well, I think there are two or three reasons for that. Firstly, from a political perspective, I think one of the monumental blunders, I mean, that's my personal view, was that Shimla Accord, where we just
Hmm.
about gave everything back and and bargained for nothing. We were in a position to negotiate from a position of strength. We just sort of gave everything away, and there was a lot of bitterness that time. I remember my father saying that, "You mean we fought a war in vain? If it was all going to be given away so easily, we didn't even Kashmir could have been probably settled then to a certain extent. May or may not. I don't know what would have happened many years later. But that
Hmm.
was an opportunity which perhaps had we taken at that time, things would have been pretty different now. Uh,
So we
you know,
only got ceasefire converted to an LOC, whereas we could have sealed an international border.
we could have claimed, I mean, we could have negotiated for whatever we wanted at that time.
Right.
We were in the driver's seat, but we sort of gave in very easily. And I asked this question of Mr. S.K. Singh, who later on became the foreign secretary.
Right.
When I was doing my staff college, he came to speak to us, and I knew him. I mean, our family knew him also a little bit, so I was a little more this thing. So I asked him this question. I said, "Why did he was a deputy secretary? He was one of the drafters of the Simla Agreement at that time."
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
I asked him, "Well, what was the sort of imperatives that drove you to do what you did?" You know,
Hmm.
and he actually said, "Perhaps we were naive." Now that is a strange thing to say
Ah,
at a
diplomatically.
time like this, that we were naive. So I really don't know what were the
Hmm.
imperatives that drove the decision, but I think that was something we gave in too easily over there. To that was, but Pakistan problem. After that Pakistan took a vow that they will bleed India with 1,000 cuts. Well, they
Hmm.
continue to do that till today. So, you know, if you really look at it, what do you do with Pakistan? My view is that if you try and do anything, you'll inherit a whole lot of other problems which you don't want. We have enough of our own already. Why do we want somebody else's problems on our head? So yeah, but
Yeah.
it's a problem. There's no doubt about it, and it's a problem that's not going to go away so easily. And now with this big Pakistan-China nexus happening over the CPEC and all that, it's probably going to get worse. It's definitely not going to go away, because the moment Pakistan becomes a proxy state for China, which it is inevitably headed to becoming, it's going to increase our complications on both our fronts and at sea.
So that leads us, of course, to the current situation on the Ladakh border with China. Uh, it's a complex issue, of course. Both nation states have inherited uh, undemarcated borders. That is the historical baggage we carry from perhaps British times. Uh, but equally, there are some things worth fighting for, and territorial integrity and sovereignty is, of course, uh, one of those things. Speaking from a naval perspective, do you think India is hemmed in by the Pakistan-Chinese nexus, shall we say, to being essentially just a subcontinental power, uh, hemmed in, and that is the essential geostrategic loss for India to have these two enemies on the northern borders. Uh, and again, from the naval perspective, shouldn't India be trying to break out of that um, uh, sort of constraint of being only a subcontinental power, and reach out towards being a nation power, certainly, but perhaps even more than that.
Yeah. So there are two parts to it. One is, of course, the overall, the situation that is developing, what's happening in the north on the borders. It's obviously part of a larger strategic design of China. It's not something that they've just done. It's not their standard salami slicing or doklam or depsang or whatever. This has got a
It's not
larger sort of,
square meters or
this
a
has got a
thousand
much
square.
larger strategic design. Uh, but from a naval, so this is not going to go away. It's only going to get, we've got to be prepared for the long haul here. And we've got to build up our own capacity to be able to, I wouldn't say stand up to him. We are not a weaker power, but to to be able to effectively counter anything he tries to do with us. We are not an aggressive power, so we'll probably not we take the initiative. We won't preempt, but we will not should not be in a position to back down or be forced to
Hmm.
back down on any part of it, whether it's air, whether it's land, whether it's territorial integrity, or whether it's our perception of the LAC or whatever it might be.
Hmm.
So if we have to take that stand and insist that this is a status quo and this is what will be maintained, then we have to build up a lot of capacity. And I'm not talking just military capacity. We have to build up national capacity. Our comprehensive national power has to be far, far more effective than what it is today. And China has a different sort of government. For them, any democracy is in itself a weakness, a weakness in governance. They look at it as a weakness because they feel there are too many disparate forces. There's no focused sort of approach. So they look at it as a weakness. We
We
tend to
regard
sort of, yeah, they regard it as a weakness. And India being a pretty noisy democracy with all its other issues also, they probably see these as very distinct vulnerabilities which can be exploited. you know so we have to show them that, look, whatever our internal issues might be, maybe scrapping with each other every day, but when it comes to the country and the territorial integrity, we are one. It doesn't
yeah,
matter whether you're opposition, whether you're ruling, whether you're noisemakers or not, whatever you might be, you're one. That is one message. From a maritime perspective, yes, what you say is right, but at the moment in the Indian Ocean, the Indian Navy is by far the largest power, and the PLA Navy presently is not in a position to challenge the Indian Navy in the Indian Ocean. We pack too many guns for that. Because for the PLA Navy to operate 5,000 miles away from its mainland means it needs tremendous amount of logistic support to be able to keep a sustained presence large enough to not only remain in the Indian Ocean, but to fight the Indian Navy and win a war.
hmm.
That the PLA Navy definitely does not have at the moment. Despite Djibouti, despite the base in Djibouti, despite whatever they have in Godar right now, they don't have that. What they are doing right now is they are keeping a presence in the Indian Navy. They have a few ships in the Indian Ocean floating around all the time. A flotilla just came in saying that this is for tanker protection, this is for anti-piracy, whatever. So they keep a presence, but it's not a war-winning presence. So I don't think even if this issue on the border becomes a little more than what it is now, it will not escalate into an all-out war because on the maritime domain they are weak at the moment in the Indian Ocean,
In the
and
Iowa, yes.
India obviously is not going to go into the South China Sea looking for war with China.
Hmm.
What we have done smartly, and I think, is that firstly, besides whatever capacity building efforts we are doing in the Indian Ocean, we are supporting, Maldives, Mauritius, all our maritime neighbors. We are providing them support in various ways: coastal radar stations, search and rescue facilities. We must be very clear that we are able to protect our strategic space with our presence. Our presence being us and our neighbors who are helping us in this effort, which China is always trying to muscle into. They've now taken Hambantota port in Colombo for 99 years. They're developing Chittagong Harbour. Chittagong port is being developed by them. They've given 2 submarines to Bangladesh. Now, when a thing like a submarine is given, it gives that country which is giving a submarine tremendous diplomatic and military leverage over that country. Because for 2 submarines, Bangladesh cannot afford to set up a complete training, maintenance, repair, operational facility for just 2 submarines. So it's going to be reliant on the Chinese to make sure these submarines keep sailing. So effectively, what you've now created is a Chinese presence in Chittagong Harbour, wherever these submarines are based, which can be called, well, we are keeping a few people for repair, we are keeping a few people for maintenance. But the fact is, there's a Chinese presence in that port. Similarly, in Myanmar, they are developing Chitfu port, which is a deep sea port, as an alternative to their Malacca dilemma. The Malacca dilemma is basically 80% of China's oil, which comes from the Gulf, goes through Malacca Straits,
So it's a
which is
choke point
which is a choke point, and a choke point over which India has a pivotal position.
because of the Andaman
So,
and Nicobar Islands.
because of the Andaman Nicobar Islands, and the entrance to the Malacca Straits is on our side. It's on the Indian
Yes,
Ocean.
right.
So we have a pivotal position there. We can exercise control over that choke point, which is why China calls it this Malacca dilemma. So it's not only India. Tomorrow, if India teams up with the US Navy could be there, and
Right.
prevent the Chinese ships from coming and
That's a
going.
very interesting point. As a naval person, and uh, what is your view on the strategic cooperation with the US insofar as securing our position vis-a-vis China goes? Is it too
Uh,
risky a strategy, or
no, I think within its current defined parameters, where there is no military cooperation in the real sense of the term. I mean, I don't know if you're aware, but the CNC Pacific Command, now called the Indo-Pacific Command, has been constantly requesting India to participate in joint patrols with the US Navy in the South China Sea. The freedom of navigation operations and all. And we have constantly said, sorry, we do not do joint patrols. We are not going to do joint patrols. We do coordinated patrols. We've done coordinated patrols with Thailand and Malaysia and all these countries for the Malacca Straits. But we will not do joint patrolling. Also, the foreign minister recently said that we are not going to get into any military alignment with anybody. We are going to maintain our strategic autonomy, which means we have the option to decide who we want to be with when. So I
right?
think from a military perspective, it would be foolish for India to get embroiled in a South China Sea dispute, even if America is involved in that, physically
Right.
involved, by sending ships into actual war. It's okay to send ships to deploy there because 25% of our trade is also with east of Malacca. So it's important for us. We have oil
Yes.
exploration of Vietnam. So it's important for us to have our presence there.
Fly the
So
flag.
that is
Yes.
why, without the military sort of connotation, we have entered into these foundational agreements with Japan, Australia, America, called LEMOA. It's a logistics agreement. That means we
Right.
can use their harbors, their ports for fueling our ships, their tankers when we are operating joint, we can use their tankers to fuel our ships. So that gives us tremendous logistic reach. We don't have to, every time we take a ship out to the South China Sea, we don't have to have our own tanker accompanying it. Now we can enter any of those ports from Singapore to Japan. With all these countries, we have comprehensive strategic partnerships. So we have the facility now of doing that. So that has greatly facilitated our ability to operate in the South China Sea in in to protect our own interests in the region, not to protect somebody else's interests. So that is why we keep insisting that we are part of this whole sort of Indo-Pacific construct to maintain a rules-based international order and a free and open Indo-Pacific, which is not aimed at anybody or against anybody. And anybody who subscribes to this view is welcome to be part of that construct. So,
Right.
so we have never said we don't want China or it's an anti-China thing. What we are implicitly saying is,
We want
well,
our
if you
autonomy.
are,
We want our
if
security.
you're, yeah, yeah, if you're with us, fine. If you're not, well, then we are going to insist on this. So I don't think India is going to get.
Sky question. Um, you mentioned earlier comprehensive national power, which is uh, I suppose, um, a jargonish way of saying what the true strength of a country is,
That's
uh,
correct. That's correct.
or not just of the sword arm of a nation state, but also its perhaps soft power, cultural strengths, uh, uh, reduced fissures in society, etc. Uh, what if you've served in many positions of responsibility in command of fighting ships and then in terms of design, thinking the future and so on. If you had to hope or draw up a hope for India of your dreams in terms of comprehensive national power 50 years hence, what would some elements of that dream be?
Look, I think India has got certain inherent weaknesses right now, which are being addressed but not being addressed fast enough. I think firstly we need to come into the 21st century. We are still very much in a post-colonial sort of administrative architecture in this country, and I don't mean administrative. I don't mean the IAS. I mean administrative governance structures.
Hmm.
We need to we need to get into the 21st century. We are nowhere near that. We are all generalists. Anybody can do any job. That's not how the world is working today. It's not about turf battles. We are still caught up in that mentality that he's coming, he's stepping into my turf, my empire building must happen. We have to grow out of that, and that
Hmm.
sort of thing can only come when the political leadership is strong enough to make sure it happens. Even jointness in the military. If you see the Goldwater Nichols Act that came, it faced tremendous amount of opposition within the U.S. military itself about jointness. And
Hmm.
the Secretary of Defense called the generals who were opposed to it and said, "Please have your resignations on my table by tomorrow morning, because we are going ahead with this. You're either with us or you're not with us." So it's got to
Hmm.
be. I'm not saying we have to do something that drastic, but we have
Yeah.
to do it. Unfortunately, in the last 6 years, I'm afraid there was a lot of hope. A government that came in with such a big mandate would have brought in more reform across the country. I am sorry to say, but I don't think enough has happened. It may have happened in bits and pieces, but not enough has happened, and a
Hmm.
lot more needs to happen. We need to, I think, focus a hell of a lot more on our education, our healthcare. Till you don't have a strong citizenship, till your people are not strong and confident and resilient, what national power will you be able to project to the world? While we may be the fourth largest economy in the world and we keep harping about it, we are somewhere 100 something in the global development index. Now that is not a hallmark of a power.
Yes.
So we have to start focusing on areas like that. You can have any number of IIMs and IITs, but if the primary education structure in the country is weak, those IIMs and IITs are of no use, because the product that's going to come out is going to come out from this system. So I think
Yes.
India look at 50 years, and that's why if you take a timeline of 50 years, a lot can be done in that. But if you do 50 years, you have to start planning it from now. You've got to have a 50-year strategy. Unfortunately, I don't think we think that far. At least in security, we don't. We don't even have a security strategy. India is
Certainly
the
not.
only country,
Yes. Yes.
75 years after independence, a democratic country has not produced a single white paper on defense. Even China produces one every 3 years or 5 years.
Hmm.
But we haven't had one single white paper on defense in 75 years. It just shows where the thinking is.
So
You
it
know,
takes a crisis
yeah, to
to
coming
force.
to coming to the maritime domain, we
Hmm.
always confuse maritime power with naval power. We are a naval power. We are not a maritime power. We may think we are a maritime power, we are not. And look at the interest maritime. We have a 7,500 kilometer long coastline.
Yes,
We
I was
have
coming.
200 ports. We have 200 ports.
Hmm.
94% of our trade by volume comes and goes from the sea. 77% by value comes and goes by the sea. 80% of your energy, 80% of your energy comes from the sea. It's that important. Are we paying
Yeah.
enough attention to the sea? I'm afraid not. Our shipbuilding is 0.5% of the world's shipbuilding is in India. Just 0.5%. China is 65% or 60%.
So
China's
they
smallest
expect Yes.
China's smallest defense shipyard is bigger than all our defense shipyards combined. So, what did we do? Private shipyards came in to build warships. You killed them. In 5 years, they shut down because you won't give them orders. So, I mean, there are many things, but I think personally, if you ask me, I think the basic foundations of the country have to be strengthened. We've got to go back to the drawing board and start from scratch building up this country. If we take a 50-year timeline, we must look at where do we want to be 50 years down the line. If we have to be there now, this is what we have to start doing now. It doesn't matter whether I'm in power, not in power, what the next election does. That's okay. The short-term political goals are one thing, but there should be a vision for a long-term vision for the country,
National
which should be
consensus on strengthening the nation state.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I'm sorry, sometimes my views can be a bit drastic, but that's the way they are.
No, I don't think they're drastic at all. I think every forward-thinking, right-thinking individual in this country would find it impossible to disagree with you. Um, there is so much to be done. Much has been achieved, no doubt, but there is so much that remains to be done.
Yes.
And, I thank you for your candid and honest opinion. Because come what may, we want the best for this country and for our people. And we are nothing without our people, of course. Uh, you represent as a retired officer the men under your command, but you speak for the greater national good beyond that of the navy or the armed forces, something much bigger than that. The principles of what should drive a modern nation state, the welfare of its people.
Well, thank you.
With that, I'm afraid we have run on. I've taken up at least 45 minutes more of your evening, Commander. It's been a privilege and a great joy to speak with you, hear your views, the joy with which you've spoken of your time in the Navy, the camaraderie, the joy of leading men who've almost done the impossible when push came to shove. It's That's what makes us believe in the idea of India, in the hope for a better life for its populace. I thank you again, and this has been a little different from our usual cultural stories talking about arts and textiles and and history. A little new for our viewers, no doubt, but I hope it has been enjoyable and educative for our viewership. I thank you once again, everybody. Thank you, Commander Singh, once again. Sorry, Commodore Singh. I beg your pardon.
Sorry.
And sorry, forgive me. And I hope we can get a chance to do more of these kinds of events in the future. Till
Thank
then,
you.
thank you, sir. Good night.
Thank
Till then, thank you, viewers. We look forward to hearing your comments on Ganga Jamuni Heritage on Facebook or Instagram. And do write in with your suggestions on what we should bring to you. Uh, Different topics, some different from what we do usually, or more of the same, whatever you like. And we'll be happy to put them out as and when we find the right person to talk intelligently about it, as today. Thank you very
thank
much.
you. Thank you very
Goodbye.
much, Ganga Jamuni and Rohit. And thank you to your viewers who had the patience to sit through this. Thank
It's
you very
been,
much. It's been a pleasure and a privilege to be part of this event.
thank you.
And I certainly look forward to listening to more events of Ganga Jamuni in the future on all the other subjects you mentioned. They must be
Yes,
extremely educated. Yeah.
yes, I'm sure that's also part of comprehensive national power.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you very much. Thank you and good night. Thank you.
Good night. Thank you, viewers. Good night.